Did either of you experience burnout in your career, and what did you do to kind of prevent that?
Well, he went to a mental hospital and I checked out for a few months after crying on the runway saying, I can't try anymore.
Welcome to the Pole Vault Vlog. My name is Shawn Francis, and today I am going to share with you the talk that I gave at the Reno Pole Vault Summit on mental health. To say I was nervous was an understatement. I think there's a lot of things in here that will help people inside and outside of the sport, so I'm sharing it with you now. If you're interested in anything I'm doing with mental health, or you'd like to support what I'm doing, the Pole Vault Toolbox is a great place to start. And for the mental health stuff, Owl Mental Health. Let's do it.
To you guys, Shawn Francis. He's going to speak to you about the mental health and mental stability of athletics and life and balancing things. So let's give it up for Shawn.
First off, I just want to say it's pretty cool to follow Erica Fraley. Like, she was one of my heroes watching when I was in pole vault. Pretty cool to see I want to start with an activity. I want everyone, it's only 30 seconds long, you don't have to jump on the table or anything, I'm not doing anything too weird, but just close your eyes, and I want everyone just to see what your thoughts are doing. And I'll time it out. It's going to feel like forever if you've never done this before. Just 30 seconds, I promise. Starting now. All right, you can open your eyes. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to kind of keep track and keep a note of what was going on in your head during this time. All right, we're gonna come back to it later, I promise. When I was asked to do this, it reminded me of this story, and it's kind of fascinating. So when I think it was around 2015, a kid reaches out to me through social media and goes, "Hey, I have a friend who just committed suicide. He's on the track pole vault team with me, and I don't know who to talk to. What do I do?" I was like, "You need to call your dad and your parents. You need to tell them, like what's going on. You need like a counselor or whatever else." And he's a kid. He didn't do any of that, and I kind of knew he wasn't going to do that in the first place. So what I did was, since I had social media, every morning I reached out to him, see how he was doing. One was just to see if he was still alive, because that can happen. And he would text me back, "Yeah, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me." And I text him at night, "Hey, how's everything doing? You doing all right? How'd school go? Did anything weird happen?" Again, "Yeah, everything's fine." I did this for about 3 weeks. Everything from, what'd you learn in school? Did you learn about who invented the cotton gin? Because for some reason that's still stuck in my brain with Eli Whitney. Why do I have that in there? Like we still, I don't know. I said, that'll never go away. So after 3 weeks, he started going, "Hey man, I know what you're doing. You don't have to talk to me. You can just, it's fine. Yeah, I'm good. Like everything's fine." So I dropped it down to once a week for another couple of weeks, to see how he was doing. And then what was crazy about that was about a week later, I got a message from a parent. "Hey, I have a son whose friend just committed suicide. What do I do? How do I talk to my son?" And I was like, this is weird. Is your son so-and-so? And he goes, "Yeah, how did you know?" I was like, "He's been talking to me for about 3 weeks about the same exact problem." And the parent was relieved, right? He's like, thank God he had a place to go to talk to this person. He didn't know what else to do. I did the same thing, go to counselors, talk to these people. Here's some resources you can go to. And what struck me, and what never leaves me, is that those two people lived in the exact same house, and they couldn't talk about what was going on. Whether his parent worried about his son, couldn't talk to his son. The son that was having these problems or issues or concerns and couldn't talk to his own parent. And that kind of struck me. Why did they reach out to some strange guy on the internet before they could talk to each other, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, some of that. So 2 big things happened in 2012 for me. The first is I checked into a mental health hospital. And apparently being in grad school and writing a thesis and running a pole vault club and coaching D1 vaulters and working 30 hours a week while training for the Olympics isn't normal. So I was burnt out. And I didn't know at the time that wasn't normal, right? And so I was trying to maintain a social life at the same time and a relationship and other relationships. And it reeks of that perfectionist overachiever mentality, right? And so when one of those pieces came crashing down, everything else followed. So everything else tumbled. And there I was, just kind of stuck in my own mental health chaos going on. And it took 6 weeks of me being in the hospital to feel better and get back to the regular schedule. So the first thing I did, pole vault, right? Like that, out of all those things, grad school and work, was like, I'm gonna pole vault first. That's the most important thing. And that's what I did because it's good for my soul. I literally had a guy ask me one time, why are you still training for the pole vault? And I couldn't answer the question, and I'm sure Erica can kind of relate to that too. Like, you're losing money every year. I'm tired. It's just difficult. It's a hard road to do post-college. And he just looks at me from Europe and goes, it's good for your soul, man. And it's like, yes. I couldn't have said it anymore. That's exactly why I did that. And so when I got back, I started coaching those D1 pole vaulters again up at NDSU. That was step 2. Step 1 was me vaulting. Step 2 was coaching. I just love those 2 things. And again, if you're thinking like, what happened to school? I just stopped going to school. Like I needed like some help, right? So, school was taking a back burner. And the one thing I learned while I was in there, I learned a lot of things, but one thing that really helped me out was to have a more balanced and realistic perspective on what's going on, right? Like if we're looking at that, I had all these things going on, and I'm going, that's normal. I need to probably be doing more, that's what's going on in my head. And it's not realistic. And Erica talked about that quite a bit in her speech, which is perfect. And when I was in there, I was taught this little trick that instead of calling things right or wrong, we focus on effective and ineffective. And just that tweak in perspective changes absolutely everything in how you see life. Like, was what I did wrong, or was it just ineffective based on the situation we were in? And that trick, absolutely changed my life to the fact, if you look at a bell curve, I know most of you probably aren't nerds like I am, but in grad school they talk about bell curves all the time. But everybody seems to fall in the middle, that's where the averages are, and the outsides are the extremes. So I don't want to pull politics into this. The stuff you see on the internet and social media are all on the extreme sides, yes. And all of us fall right in the middle. That's usually how that works. And you realize that life is like a giant spectrum, just like that. And if you're on one of those extremes, for example, in the extreme of how much should I be doing, I was way on the right side. Not normal, healthy, and what happened, fell because of it, And by looking at only some of the data on there, if let's say we're looking at effective and ineffective, if you're looking on the right side of that spectrum, you're looking at things that's just effective. You're only getting part of the data. The whole entire spectrum is all of it. If we only look on the left side, you're only getting the stuff that's ineffective. Does that kind of make sense? So what we really want to do is we want to be able to look at the whole entire bell curve so we can see what's going on. Even the ugly parts that might be the extremes, if you can see it, so be it. But you really want to look at the left and right side of the middle, of the averages. So one of the first things I noticed, which seemed weird after I got out of that mental health hospital, was before everyone gets off the pole vault runway, I'm told 2 to 4 things they did wrong. Okay? You guys deal with that too? While they're in the air, you might have some of those kids. They jump up oh, my plant was bad, and then they try and finish their jump, and then they're looking at their coach while they're falling, trying to ask what's going on, right? Yeah, you guys might be some of those if you go to pole vault too. I was one of those. So I was fired up. I was feeling pretty good. I dropped all the stuff that I was doing because I couldn't do any of it anymore, and just focused on improving my mental health. And I had this little trick, that I just learned. And the first thing I did with my vaulters and my own training was, is this really wrong, or do we just not find the answer that worked, right? Is this effective or ineffective, which is essentially what we were doing there. So I say this a lot, if you land in the pole vault pit and don't die, more things are going right in the pole vault than wrong. right? It's true, we're running with a stick and jumping over a stick. So many things can go wrong. So if you survive a fall, it was going really well, to be honest with you. So here's what happened when I started doing this with my Division I vaulters. 2 girls started crying instantly. So what I did was I had them get off the pit, and they couldn't tell me what was wrong. They had to tell me 2 good things that happened before they could tell me what was wrong or ineffective. 2 girls started crying immediately. They just couldn't come up with anything. 2 guys started laughing uncontrollably because they couldn't find anything that was right with their vault. And one guy got so frustrated, he was like, I can't pole vault today. And he just turned and walked away. And then I started laughing because I didn't expect that. Move this over a bit. So over time, they started to understand what I was doing, and they adapted to this new way of thinking about how practice is going to go. And what ended up happening is it became more fun because there wasn't, I know you fail in the pole vault, but with this perspective, at practice, you start to go, the failure is just a way to learn how to be more effective in this event. So I didn't fail, I just found an answer that didn't work. And so if you look at it, that's almost like finding another form of success, right? It was hard for me to wrap my head around this in grad school too. Like, people would spend 3 years to do a research project, and then they would find that what they were looking for wasn't there, and everyone would lose their minds that they spent 3 years trying to find out how to. So one guy was trying to use pickle juice to cure cramps, and he did 5 or 6 different research studies trying to figure this out and couldn't find what it was in the pickle juice that cured cramps, right? And he was losing his mind. But if he had this effective and ineffective thing, he might have felt a little bit better about it. So, like I said, they adapted, practice becoming more fun, and it wasn't this nonstop self-criticism that they had the whole time. And by the end of that season, I only had 2 months left of the season, everybody on that team PR'd, which was pretty phenomenal, just by tweaking this little trick inside their heads. And, sorry about that. And over time, I started implementing more and more of these little strategies I was learning that was helping with my own mental health in sports, and just realizing that. So we call it sports psychology, child psychology. We have all these different forms of psychology, but it's all just psychology. It's all the same exact thing. So in my book, I wrote a whole section in sports psychology where we talk about mental knots. And as some of you know, I started this project, another project called One Whole Life, where I talk to mental health experts and try and figure out what's going on, because there's not a lot of information or research out there. And trauma is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and like I said, I've called them trauma knots, but I'm rewording. I'm changing it because after talking to these mental health experts, sorry, I didn't want to move without you getting that picture. I've heard it. Hopefully this helps you guys too. Think of it as like a snow-covered hill. All right. When you sled down the hill, you leave a track, correct? You run up the top of the hill, you sled down the same track. That little groove gets a little deeper, right? If you continue to go down that same track, it will continue to get deeper and deeper and deeper. This is exactly how neural pathways work in the brain. The more we use one, the easier it becomes to fall into that groove. So even if you start at the top and you have a wonky sled with maybe one, I'm from Minnesota, so if you guys don't know how snow works, I don't know how it goes. But you have but if you have like that, on the toboggan, little metal piece, the sled, I can't even think what it's called, but if it's a little wonky and it's not screwed in tight, you might slide back into that other groove, and then you're stuck in that groove the rest of the way down. That's how this works. And this is really great. Our brains are awesome at this, and it creates automation, right? So you don't have to think about doing stuff anymore. So example, let's just use pole vault because we're all pole vaulters in here. If you practice the same thing long enough, it's reaction, right? That groove is so deep, you don't even have to think about how you're going to, do the activity anymore. So when sledding down the hill after 30 uses, is it going to be easy to get out of the track, or is it going to be hard to get out of the track? Like, think about that. It's going to be a lot harder. That groove is deep. So what about if you do one sled? down the thing? Is it going to be easier to get out of that groove if you don't want to be in it? Yeah, right? So sled analogy, pretty awesome. So why were those girls crying? Because they were so used to finding what's wrong about their vault that it was difficult to get out of that groove. And so we were forcing them to pay attention and create a new groove. And the brain is freaking awesome in the fact that it can adapt, right? If we want to get out of that groove, we can create new neural pathways and decide maybe not to sled down that groove anymore, and we can go to a different part of that hill and create a whole new groove. And that's cool because when I was younger, learned a little bit of my history with depression and mental health. This was my second hospitalization, the first one when I was 10. So I've been going through this for a long time, which is why I'm standing behind this, because I feel like I'm safer behind it because of the anxiety. But our brain's ability to adapt and change over time is a result of experience. So as we create these new experiences, create new grooves, it's easier for that to happen. And why did the guy leave practice? He just couldn't create that new groove. It was too deep. And why were those other guys laughing? Maybe they had a little bit more self-awareness where I don't even know where to start to create a new groove. I don't know how to get to the top of that hill anymore, you know? And that's what's pretty cool about the human mind, is that we have the ability to constantly be creating new grooves. And as I was saying earlier with the depression thing, as a kid, I was taught that once you have this trauma imprinted into your brain, it's there forever. And that groove may be there, but you can create a different groove that you're in more. Does that make sense? Sort of? So you're not stuck with this forever. Neuroplasticity and the science behind it has been pretty phenomenal, paying attention to it. So when this all starts with being aware of where you are and what's happening inside, and being able to make a different choice, which is hard for most people don't like to look inside. And so when I get questions from, pole vault coaches, like, how do I talk about mental health? How do I do these things? It's like, well, what are you doing to talk about your own? Are you looking inside at all? What are you doing? What's happening in practice where people don't feel like they can talk to you? Those types of things. So the definition of trauma is an emotional or psychological trauma is a result of extraordinarily stressful events that shatter your sense of security. It essentially just means you don't feel safe. And so, like, back to the sledding metaphor, trauma can be this massive event that acts like a giant beam, like, for example, say a pole breaks. That's a pretty traumatic event for a lot of kids. They're like, I don't know if I want to pole vault ever again. That's like taking a giant beam and throwing it on the hill, and it creates a deep groove right off the bat. It's not this slow progression of creating this groove. So things that can create these deep grooves in the pole vault are like a broken pole, an injury, a no height at a big or small knee. And the awesome and hard part of this is that everybody is different. No matter what kind of kid you have, again, I'm talking metaphors and analogies. Imagine, like, for some kids, the snow is a lot harder, so it's harder to start those grooves. For other kids, it's nice and fluffy, and these might be the more sensitive type kids where you go down at once and that groove's pretty deep, and there's a lot of grooves and things going on. And one of the most eye-opening things I've ever learned from talking about these mental health experts is that these grooves don't have to be big or small, and as we kind of talked about this, it can be death by 1,000 needles, as I've said. You can get a deep groove by going down the same path one time, or you can get it by going over it multiple times, over and over and over again. So, like, again, one big pass might be that pole break, an injury, or landing in the box, and a lot of these small passes might be running through, not taking a vault up, or stopping in the wind in terms of just pole vault alone. And again, remember, every pole vaulter is different, where one vaulter might break a pole and laugh it off and go grab the next biggest one and then get a PR, right? We saw that at the World Championships a few years ago, where what was her last name again? At World Championships for women in the box. Yeah, pole broke and landed in the box a few World Championships years ago. She was from Sweden, Mondo's teammate. Yeah, there you go. But she landed in the box, pole breaks, she lands in the box, and she's like, okay, grabs the next pole, bigger pole, breaks a national record on her next attempt. Where other kids will go, I'm never pole vaulting ever again, and they're out. I'm like, I didn't know poles could break. I thought they're just more bendy, more sendy kind of situation. So the number one thing that I see creates these grooves, and I talk about it in my book, is like progression, or slow progressions are the best progressions, which means like we progress too fast. And for me personally, being like on the internet, I guess for 10 years talking about pole vault, is I get a lot of emails from coaches and kids just going, I don't know what happened. You know, we moved him up to the next pole. I was like, well, what was the next pole? Well, he was on 12.6, 130. We moved him up to the next pole, which is a 14, 150, and then we just had him grip up like 3 handholds, and you know, it should have worked, right? I'm like, no, not at all. And this is where the education piece of pole vault can be really frustrating, because it's not a good progression by any stretch, but that's why you guys are here, you know this. So the easiest way to do this as a coach or a parent is just to avoid the ineffective grooves first off, and that starts with these progressions, and reinforce the effective grooves, right? If we want a good groove, you go over that hill a couple more times, and as we do, it's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I have a few rules personally about or helping with this. The rule of 3: never change a setting in a practice until a vaulter does it at least 3 times in a row. I know Erica was talking about doing it 7 times in a row, which is awesome too, but no more, no less than 3 times. So if we move a change where I want you to go up 2 fingers in grip, they're gonna do that 3 times in a row, because I always joke, the first one's a fluke, like, hey, it worked, but did it really work? Let's do another experiment. Do it again, okay, I'm not convinced yet. The 3rd time, all right, that was pretty good, let's go on. Small adjustments in the run, grip, and pull, as we talked about, the pole situation can be really hard, especially if you're at a high school that doesn't have a good line of poles. It's really hard to progress poles. So for the run, no more than 1 left or 2 steps at a time. And then no more than 3-inch movements at a time. So when someone says, let's go back a foot on your run, I kind of haven't done that unless maybe you're at a meet, right? But in practice, you know, there's exceptions to some of these rules, but 3 inches usually at a time. Grip, no more than 3 inches in grip at a time, and I tend to go an inch. You know, I mark all my poles in inch increments all the way up, so no one's doing hand holds, because everyone's hands are different sizes, so you never know how high they're moving. Or people eyeball it, like, there was some dirt on my tape, and that's where I've been gripping the whole time, you know, like, now we retape like poles and you don't know where your grip is anymore, because there's more dirt on your tape. See that a lot. And then when moving to a longer pole, I tend to keep the grip the same for the first jump. And so if you're going up to a longer pole, and then I drop the weight down 5 pounds in grip. So it's essentially the same move going straight over it. And then for the pole, I stick to 5 pounds at a time if you can, and that's about 1.0 in flex. Numbers if you guys are flex number people. And maybe not. Most people don't even know what a flex number is when I talk to them. And then I only adjust 6 inches at a time. And so when moving to a longer pole, it's typically 6 inches longer, keep the grip the same and drop the weight 10 pounds. And that's usually a pretty easy progression to move through. And I understand this is the absolute hardest part about like pole vault is poles. Like we just don't have them, you know? Or programs don't have a good pole, which is why the club system has been so amazing to watch, because they have a line of poles. And kids progress really fast there because they can have these progressions. And then for vaulters, I only allow 3 run-throughs or no swing jumps before we make a change. And that's just to avoid those ineffective grooves, if that makes sense. So if they start running through, we don't want that groove to get so deep that we can't climb out of it ever again. And I've seen it a lot. Like, you just gotta try harder, right? Some coaches or parents, if you see that, it doesn't work. So what happens if you fall into a groove? That's where I get a lot of emails. Is first you gotta isolate the cause. And it's most likely a progression issue most of the time. And the easiest way to fix a groove is create a new one, throw success at it, right? So if the case is from progressing too fast, which is a result of getting stood up or a weird landing or hand slipping or something like that, start where the vaulter can achieve 5 to 10 reps of success with the grip, pull, and run, and possibly the bar, so you can make those changes and slowly work your way back up, if that makes sense. So, kid runs through 3 times in a row, and then all of a sudden they're stuck in this groove. We can't get them out. We go where they can actually do the pole vault again, and I've had to do this myself, and I've done it with a lot of my vaulters, where sometimes you have to go back to, we're doing 1 left, walking, and just starting back with pole plant drills. We're gonna go up 3 inches at a time, follow the previous slides, suggestions, and work right back up. And if you follow the progressions, everything usually works out pretty good, and they get out of that groove. And then the last thing you can do is just keep it fun. Like, how many times can kids clear their opening bar, right? We forget that we're running with a stick and jumping over a stick, and it's so easy to fall into that trap of going, I need to be better, I need to get that next bar, 'cause it's always within reach, right? It's always about 6 inches or less away of that next PR. Sometimes, like, I've had to go, how many times can you knock the bar down? Which sounds like blasphemy, probably in this room for sure. But sometimes if a kid's not swinging, they might be afraid of the bar. So all we want them to do first is just to land in the pit and not be afraid of the bar. So sometimes I have them swing up and just knock the bar down. And then we can go to that next progression of, let's put the bar really low, we can go back over it and start working our way back up again. You can create all sorts of games like this. Sam Kendricks is a master at this. If you watch how many times he can clear his opening bar, he plays all sorts of these games. When they were in the garden, that was a whole nother pole vault game that doesn't exist. And it just creates the practices to be fun again. So what makes this kind of difficult is if the cause is something else like lack of sleep, a test, too much work, relationship issues, a coach, parents, etc. I always take a page out of Robert Andrews' book. I had the opportunity to do a podcast with Robert Andrews, who was Simone Biles' sports psychologist, and actually worked with Erica.
And my sport. I got him started the pole vault.
Yeah, she was her first pole vaulter, and then I didn't know that until recently, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But he talked about writing down when do you perform optimally. Like, what is going on in your life, in your brain, in your social, with your friends, and what's going on. So if it is a lack of sleep issue, you could go, everything's going great, I'm just not getting enough sleep because I have a test. Oh, well, maybe when your test is over, we can get back there. Or maybe you're not sleeping enough, because you're worried about this test and those types of things. So then by isolating that cause and knowing where you perform optimally, you can start to work to get back there. And unfortunately, you just may have to be creative because there's no right way to do this. There's just a righter and a wronger, effective and ineffective way. Is the best way to say that. It was a surprise slide. Only people who have the classes can see it. So after getting help from the mental health hospital, I realized that I didn't want a full-time job. I was chasing something I never even wanted. And what I wanted to do is pole vault full-time, but in our society, you can't do that. That's the wrong thing to do. So what happened was I had the courage to go do that. And so after I got out, I had about 6 months left to finish my thesis. And I was like, I'm going home. My parents were really cool. They let me move back in with them. And I pole vaulted full-time. And what ended up coming from that was a silly little pole vault YouTube vlog that I make. And it started out of staying in contact with a group of kids that I was coaching up at NDSU called Team NODAC. It was like my first group of kids that I ever coached. And I felt a little guilty, a lot of guilty about leaving North Dakota and leaving them up there, not being able to help them anymore. And what happened was it started catching steam in the pole vault community because we're all thirsty for information and knowledge. And what I was doing was just showing what elite vaulters are doing. And this was before social media, essentially. All there was Facebook and YouTube. And I was just making a weekly video of showing everything that elite vault, whatever that really looks like. It looks different to everybody, but what that looks like training to be a potential Olympian. And it's the reason I'm here today. So 2 years after that, I'm making these vlogs, and as some of you know, if you expect me to be like, welcome to the pole vault vlog, I'm Shawn Francis, and here we talked everything pole vault. I build up this energy in the videos and the vlog, and so when people sometimes see me, they're like, you're a lot less crazy than I thought you were being when I was going to see you, And so what ended up happening was there was a time that I just couldn't put on that show anymore, right? I didn't feel happy because depression issues, right? I didn't talk about those already. And so instead, I just wanted to be honest because I fell in love with the community and they were been super supportive up until that point when I was doing this. Been doing this for like 3 years by that point. And I made a vlog, and I talked about what I was going through, that I wrestle with depression and mental health issues. And it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life. I didn't look at comments or the views or anything for 4 days. I was like, nope, done, let's go do something else. And when I finally looked, it was full of people who shared their stories with me. There was no criticism, like, you're weak, your mind, you can control your thoughts, you can control all of these things. It was full of everything from people sharing their suicidal thoughts to their fear of spiders, like that spectrum of things. And reading those stories was so powerful to me that since then I've never stopped talking about it. Like, as scared as it is for me to stand up here and talk to you all about these, like, I wish I had an elevator button that could just like disappear behind this thing. But it's so important because I've always explained it, it's a skeleton that's in everybody's closet, and when we can talk about our own skeletons, it allows other people to talk about theirs. And then when everyone's skeletons are out in the open, you kind of go, I don't know why I was in the closet. Who cares? We're all dealing with this. So that stigma, right? And I'm still feeling it now talking about it in front of you guys. But when that son and dad reached out to me, like, I asked, what made these two reach out to a complete stranger on the internet versus talk to a family member in their own home? And I've thought about this for a long time, and I think the only answer is that I had the door open, right? At the end of all of those vlogs from 2014 on, I would go, if anybody needs any help and you don't know where to turn to, let me be that person that you can turn to. And kid reached out, dad reached out, and we pointed them in the right direction. And they ended up getting professional help. I forgot to tell you that earlier. So it wasn't just some weird guy who's trying to tell you everything's going to be fine. Let's talk about Eli Whitney, And I've always promised if I didn't have the answer, I would help find it. So and that just all came from having that door open. So I've been told we can't avoid trauma, right? Like the snow. Thoughts, experiences are going to create grooves in our snowy hills, right, in our minds. And these neural pathways and grooves, they're not good or bad, they're just ineffective, right? If we can reframe that, it can change your entire life. It has mine. And what is hard for people sometimes is even what we call trauma, it's just trying to protect us, right? A pole breaks, we have this massive trauma, and your body and brain are going, I don't think you should ever do that. Let's help you survive and never pole vault again. And so that fear is there to help protect us. And this happens in everything we do, whether it's standing up here public speaking, and I'm feeling this fear, and I want to be a part of a tribe or a crowd, and if I screw up, I might lose my tribe or crowd. Like that's just how our brains are always working. And yeah, and the craziest part is, so that pole breaks, we have the fear, and what I've been kind of fascinated is what makes the kid want to go vault again, even with the fear versus not, right? And that's just something to think about, and that's kind of where we pull back to. Let me step back for a minute. This can be especially difficult if we have deep grooves, right? But trust me when I say that life is more enjoyable when you're able to choose your groove versus falling into them all the time. And since 2012, I've become more apparent that it starts with us paying attention to our inner world, our thoughts and our emotions, and then being curious about them, like where do they come from? And at the kind of the motto of this One Whole Life vlog project I've been doing about mental health is to not believe everything you think. You are not your thoughts. Your kids are not their thoughts. They have thoughts. They come up. It's like watching TV, and I've always explained it that way, where you can have all these things. Everyone's seen Jurassic Park in here? We'll use that for an example. That scene where they're in the kitchen and there's a velociraptor up there, and they're like tapping the metal spoon on the ground and stuff, and it freaks you out when you watch it, right? These kids are gonna get eaten by velociraptors, and that's how our brains are, right? There isn't a velociraptor, there isn't a threat in our world at that exact moment, but we feel like there is, and that's the power of what TV can do. And our brains sort of work that way. We can have these thoughts, and they might not be real. And every mental health expert I've talked to, because I've asked the same question, it's like, is is this really real? We don't have to believe everything we think. Like, you don't. Thoughts are just thoughts. They just come up like clouds in the sky. So the first thing we did is we took 30 seconds to watch our thoughts at the beginning of this presentation. And I'm sure some of you maybe thought it was stupid. Maybe some of you fell asleep. Maybe some of you were like, oh my gosh, there's a lot going on in there. Maybe some of you had nothing, just birds chirping or something. Maybe some of you ignored the whole thing altogether and went on your phones. Who knows? No matter what you were doing, you don't have to believe everything you think. In one of my early podcasts, I was just told that when you do that, you can start asking what's true about this. And then that creates a little like detective work on your side, and you can challenge those thoughts and create new grooves that are more effective to helping you get to life where you want to go. So how do you use this to help with your pole vaulters' mental health? I went to a mental health hospital, and every one of my vaulters PR'd at the end of the season, so I mean, you guys could try that if you really want. But it's very helpful. But start by opening the door. And what I found is if you open the door for yourself first, if you guys start on this journey, it's easier for you to open the door for other people. This Reno has been insane for me personally. I've had more people come to me about mental health than I have about the pole vault side of things that I do. And I literally just started with the mental health side of things. And it's just because I've opened the door and talk about it. So like I said, if you really want to start helping your vaulters' mental health, start exploring your own. And if you notice you have resistance in my request, that's noticing it. Like that's it. You're challenging a pattern, and all I can say to you with that is to keep going. So maybe just start with 30 seconds a day, and then just keep asking what's true about this thought, and then what you learn through that process, you're gonna be able to help your athletes tenfold on the other side of that. All right, questions? No? There's a lot of snow talk on that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you two stories.
Can you repeat that? I didn't.
Yeah, so she was saying she goes to recruiting visits and they ask what percentage of the sport is mental for you. And she was expecting more of a 50-50 answer, and the response she was getting was, is it your daughter? Her daughter was saying it was more like 80% mental and the rest was physical. And the great Don Hood, if you guys know who that is, told me at a camp one time, the pole vault is 80% mental and the rest is in your head. And so I use that all the time because it's so true. It's extremely mental. It's a fear-based event, right? Every change produces a little bit of fear, and that's almost wrapped into everything we're doing. For me personally, I think it's funny. I got my undergrad education and thought, all right, I'm going to be able to teach people things I know. And then I was like, I don't really know much. So all right, let's go figure out how the body works, and that'll help. So I got my master's in biomechanics and exercise physiology. And then halfway through that, I was like, oh crap, it all starts in your head, and that's what controls everything else. So I'm not going to school anymore. I'm done with that. But I literally thought about it for a while. But yes, I think this sport specifically is such a mental chess game on every time you step onto the runway, and that's why I think I literally thought 20 people were going to show up. So having a room this full is amazing to me that we're actually able to have conversations like this. So.
Hi. I really appreciate you talking, both of you. Thank you very much. I have a daughter who's a senior, and she is going to a D1 school in fall. And I just want to know, this whole event has been challenging just in regards to making the decision. And now she's coming up on the season for pole vaulting. She's got a lot of anxiety, and she's starting to do a lot of run-throughs. And I just don't know how to support her and make sure she's okay. So, looking for help there.
I'm not a parent, but my wife's pushing it, so she's up here in the front. I always, when I get to the bottom of these rabbit holes, it's always just love, just unconditional love, for anybody, but especially your child, I would highly recommend Robert Andrews' book. I think it's called like Champions Mental Edge, or you can look at the podcast I did with him too. We talked about this a lot, especially, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, getting back into where their optimal performance levels are. And it sounds like all of this pressure coming from, I need to make these bars, and now I need to do this, and I need to get into this college, and I need to do this, is just putting weight on top of her. So and this is where I don't have all the answers, but this is where you can start being a little investigator and going, how can I take some of this pressure off of her plate and get her back to where she is? Is it a mental perception kind of thing, or is it, something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, she's making decisions at school and that's ultimately, but.
Yeah, so there's one big rock off, right? Yeah.
Let go of that. But it's just a challenging time that's in here, making that decision and then all of that.
Yeah, just let her know whatever decision she makes, it's the right one.
So this is kind of a hard question because we're parents, we have 3 kids, and our daughter is the most self-motivated person we know. But when you talk about the right fit for colleges and what level can they realistically achieve, and I couldn't hold her back if I wanted to, and I certainly couldn't make the choice for what college to send her to. I'd love to steer her in the right direction. Is there a resource that talks about levels and what level they get to at certain colleges versus? I'm almost afraid to ask that because I don't want to tell her what level she's going to get to because she dreams big.
I would say one of the best things that you can do on your own is to look at the conference championship results. So whatever schools that she's kind of looking at, figure out what conference they're in, look and see what the results are at that conference and see where your kid fits. And if your kid is like in the middle of where their conference results would be, you know that that's the kind of level that they can succeed in. Or if they're like right on the edge of that. If they're a foot away from what scores at conference, that may be too much of a gap for them to be able to get to that level. I would say if your kid is someone who would be a scholarship athlete, the most effective way to get your foot in the door with the recruiting process is to email the coaches at the schools that they are interested in. There's a lot of recruiting services out there, but believe me, if I get an email from someone that thinks that they want to go to Washington State University, a personal email, that's way better than the email from the recruiting service. So those I don't even look at half the time. So make it a personal email to that. But really, I think the best way to start is to figure out what level of competition actually is happening and what exists at that school and see where your kid falls into it. And then there are some places where you see that school competes in that conference, but they don't have many pole vaulters. Don't automatically think, oh, they need some pole vaulters. They may not want to invest in pole vaulters. They may not have a pole vault coach. They may not want to buy poles. They may not want to deal with the hassle of pole vaulters at that school. And so your job is to, contact the coach. And if you never get an email back or a call back, email them a couple times. If you don't hear back, that tells you what level of interest they have for your kid. And have your child email them. They want to speak to your child, not to the parent.
Our daughter's a senior this year. For 3 of the 4 years, she's had a different pole vault coach. This year, she does not have one. She has her cross-country coach that's supported her through her 4 years. I'm not the greatest parent, because I get in her pretty hard when I know when it's obvious that she's being herself. I've never vaulted in my life, but I know when she's not doing what she should be doing. And I have a tendency to ride her pretty hard. But as a parent, I'm not sure what is not, a parent not vaulting, I have no idea what I'm looking at sometimes. I can YouTube the hell out of stuff and see it, but what would you, on something like that?
I'm going to let Shawn talk on this too, but I'm going to say, remember that most of what happens to have a successful vault happens before they leave the ground. So when they're The way they run and the way they carry the pole and the way they take off the ground determines whether they're going to have a successful jump. So as pole vault coaches even, it's always easy to get fixated in the air. And for parents, even more so, you're focused on get your hips up or swing or whatever. Usually look at the run and the approach and figure out how to be a good long jumper with a pole before you worry about what happens in the air. Do you have any?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, she nailed it. I think I told you I got my master's in biomechanics, and they said I couldn't get a master's in pole vaulting, but guess what? I did, because I did my research on the pole vault, so I kind of did get my master's in pole vault. Yeah, kind of great. I showed them. But she nailed it. There was research on long jump runway work and the takeoff and the pole vault, and tried to find a difference between the two, and there really wasn't, except you had a stick in your hand. So if that's the easiest way to probably help her out with that. But that's what I've kind of dedicated my life to with the pole vault side, is that's why the vlogs continued. You know, I stopped training, and then it kind of switched to like there's a need for education and information on the sport, and seems to be a need for equipment. Those are the two biggest holes that I'm seeing all the time. And so that's why I wrote a book about this, is to try and take people who maybe don't know how to exactly start the sport. I wanted to write it in a way where you could be in 3rd grade, barely be able to read, and go, hey, I think I know how to pole vault now, you know? And so it's written kind of like that, because who knows, like I was talking about flex number, if you say that to anybody outside of the pole, even pole vaulters, is that the weight label? No, it's written usually a little higher on that weight label, but that you can learn how to pole vault. You know, it's really just transferring energy. Like if you can learn how to do that, and it all starts with the runway stuff. So you get her fast and jumping off the ground really well. I think that's a good place to start. Yeah.
If you have an athlete that vaulting is their, appears to be their primary event, but they've got other events as well. One, how do you support that? Because that's a whole lot more training. And 2, how do you navigate it from identifying the right school if, again, vaulting is their top sport, but they additionally have others? Do you target just for vaulting and it's, bonus that you do the 2 and 4? Or if you want to be able to do both of those, do you have to drop your pursuit of the level for the vault in order to be complementary to both, a couple of events?
So you're saying she's a pole vaulter who runs the 2 and the 4. So at most high-level programs, pole vaulters don't sprint. Sprinters are really fast. If your daughter is a really fast sprinter who also pole vaults, it can work. For example, Texas Tech had a girl that was the triple jumper and pole vaulter at a high level. It can happen, and it's usually special athletes that happens with. But I always encourage high school athletes to do as many events as they can have on their plate without it adding undue stress. And as a sprinter, that's really helping her, because the faster you are on the runway, the higher potential energy you have in the vault, right? So absolutely continue training for the sprint. Have a plan. Make sure you're not trying to overdo things. Remember to schedule and rest. And schedule the stressors appropriately. But when you're looking at colleges, communicate with the coach, because most college coaches have an idea of what they want and have an idea of how their program works. And for some programs, it may be that, well, you're not really fast enough to be a sprinter, but you'd probably be a leg on the relay occasionally. Is that what she's looking for? Some smaller programs are going to say, oh yeah, we need athletes to do every event they're good enough to do. And so a lot of that then is your child prioritizing what they want in their college athletic experience of, am I just a pole vaulter? Do I want to do more than that? What do the schools look like that I can do more than that? And then, scale it down from there.
Hey, so my question is, my son is very high drive type of kid. Did either of you experience burnout in your career, and what did you do to kind of prevent that?
Well, he went to a mental hospital, and I checked out for a few months after crying on the runway saying, I can't try anymore. But maybe they don't have to go to that level of extreme. I think just assessing priorities and having your kid kind of write down everything that they want to do, and then picking what's most important to them and prioritizing it and putting some structure on it so they can actually see it written on paper, and recognizing that you don't have time for everything and you don't have to overdo things to be successful. Like I said, when I was an athlete, I chose to train 5 days a week. Training 7 days a week would have been much worse for me. And so recognizing that, becoming a mature and wise athlete for high school kids sometimes is really difficult because they think more is better. And so recognizing that in order to accomplish their goals, sometimes, less is more, and being able to balance that. But I think seeing things on paper and like choosing what you're going to invest your time in can be really beneficial.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Can I add a little bit to that? Have her ask why.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. You ask, why are you working so hard? Why do you want this? And start, be a 3-year-old. Ask why. And then when they give you an answer, ask why. And then when they ask, continue. And what you'll find is that at the bottom of that, most people start pole vault because it's really friggin' fun. It's so fun. You're on a bendy stick and you're flying over the air and landing in squishy pads over another stick. It's like super fun. And that's usually why you start. And what ends up happening over time is scholarships and all these external rewards, and it starts becoming from internal fun to external all this other stuff. And it happened to you too. And it happened to me. Like, you should go to the Olympics. And then everywhere you go, they're like, are you gonna be an Olympian? You train for the pole vault, what about the Olympics? And then I was just talking to my buddy Carson Waters, who's jumping tonight, and we're like, we just like the pole vault. Like, the Olympics would be cool if it happened, but we really just like to pole vault with our friends and travel all over the place. So maybe starting with that why, you can kind of get to the nitty gritty of what happens. And if it is fun, you won't burn out on fun. It only gives you more energy. The burnout comes from the external stuff that usually is taking from you. Does that make sense?
So you guys have mentioned the benefits of being faster, right? Like if you're a sprinter and really fast, it helps with the pole vault due to increased kinetic energy. How does height fit into that? Because I'll be honest, my perception is always you have to be, extremely tall because that gave you the ability to jump higher. But obviously, you have an Olympic trials, success that it is not very tall. So can you talk a little bit about the effect of height and pole vault?
Did he just say I'm short?
You look short from here.
Well, when you see the picture of me on the medal stand next to Jen Sir and April Steiner Bennett, I looked really short. But Becky Holiday was supposed to be the one speaking to you, and I am taller than her. So height definitely helps. But, if we're going to talk about the Duplantis family, I don't know that people realize that Greg, Mondo's father, I think he says he's 5'6", and he jumped 19 feet. Why? Because he was super fast.
There we go.
So really, it's how much speed you have coming in, how much energy is going into the pole vault. Now, I should look at biomechanics next.
So I have a video on this too that might help if come down and I'll send it to you afterwards. But if you think about it, the energy is from the vault, right? Speed, that's what we want. And we want to transfer it into the pole and get the pole to vertical as fast as we can. So the height helps in the form that you can hold a little higher, the pole can get to vertical a little easier because it's easier if your angle starts a little higher, right? Does that make sense? But nothing beats speed. So Reno Lavillenie, I am not a tall pole vaulter, so on all these meets when I was competing professionally, I was looking up at like Jeremy Scott, around at everybody. And then here comes this little Frenchman, Reno Lavillenie, a few years later, and we're the same height, and he's breaking world records and the second man to jump over 20 feet, and 20 feet, like a new world record indoors. And so it definitely helps, but that just goes to show again that speed always wins. So, yeah.
How important is some kind of specialized nutrition? You always hear about it on TV, about various sports doing things. You're talking about chicken and rice. Should somebody in the teenage range be eating specialized food for this, or?
I'd say the first step is to kind of have a balanced diet. For most teens, that is a challenge in its own. So, trying to cut out processed foods and eat real food, and have as much variety of healthy foods. I mean, shoot, eating healthy goes a long ways. Specialized diet, I think it's completely overrated, and there's a lot of other things that you can hone in on before you hone in on diet to get better. Like, are they sleeping well? Do they have a balanced life? Do they have a balanced diet before you have a specialized diet? Now, obviously, for some people, if they have issues that they're trying to deal with health-wise and, end up feeling like their body functions better if they're gluten-free or they cut out dairy and things like that. That's the next step to that. But, if you're still eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast, you're not there yet. So, does that answer your question? I mean, yes, at some point, like, the better you fuel your body, the better your body is going to work for you. But, yeah.
I guess I remember in Olympics years ago, I heard runners talking about eating Twinkies to get a burn before they go running. Is there something like that?
That's been many years. Twinkies. Twinkies are a little processed for my liking. But homemade chocolate chip cookies maybe would be better. No, I tend to be just eat clean. Because when you cut out processed foods, you're cutting out a lot of chemicals that aren't really that natural for your body. But you also have to fuel your body, and so especially for girls, a lot of times they're trying to just eat less, and so what their body reacts to is, wait, when I get food, I have to keep it, because sometimes you're not giving me enough, and other times I'm trying to hold on to it, and so when you can eat balanced, healthy, natural food on a regular basis, your body is generally getting what it needs and it functions well. You're not trying to carb load like you would for a marathon. Pole vault is not that physically demanding. You don't want to jump on an empty stomach, and for some athletes, the nerves of going into competition makes it so they don't even want to eat. And so, that gives you the challenge of finding what you can stomach that gives you the fuel that you need to operate in competition. I have a hard time speaking of that because I was so scared I was going to get hungry and then feel weak that I was eating in competition all the time. So some people look at me like I was crazy because they're like, how are you eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich right now? And I'm like, well, I had to have something in my bag in case, I thought I might get hungry. But, it may be something like, you have a box of raisins that you have something, or you have a smoothie instead of eggs and bacon for breakfast. But each athlete is different in what they like to consume and what helps them feel good. But it is important for it to be consistent, I think. I mean, generally, if you eat healthy most of the time, it doesn't matter that you have a few unhealthy things in there, as long as that's not the bulk of what you're eating.
Hi, thank you, great talk. And question, how do college coaches view an athlete who does a postgraduate year and trains and then wants to go to college after that?
So you're saying they take a gap year after high school?
Yeah.
I think in a lot of time, COVID's changed everyone's perception on things a little bit. It's always easiest to recruit someone that's going through a normal process through high school. But for some athletes, they feel like they're on the verge of improvement and want to wait and get that improvement before they end up in a college program. And if that's successful, that's awesome. But at the same time, are you wanting to delay the college experience in hopes of becoming a better pole vaulter? And most of the time the answer is that's not the right way to go about it, or that's not the most effective way to go about it. So I guess the reasoning behind it matters. And the level of success they have in that gap year, that matters too. If they are, purely pursuing improvement in their sport in order to do that, a college coach is probably questioning how balanced their life is and how much push the parents are putting in that, and what happens when they actually go to college and that pressure from the parents isn't there anymore. What happens then? And that's something I'm gonna add another question of like, why do kids tend to like fall off in college sometimes when they were so good in high school? And as a college coach, I found that a lot of times the pressure parents put on kids fuels them to achieve at a high level in high school, and then they get to college and they're like, all right, let's go party. Oh, like, let's go shopping. Okay, let's go get ice cream. Let's go, do all this other stuff. I'm free from my parents, and pole vault is not a high importance on their list anymore. So long answer to your question is, it all depends.
All right, guys, I think at this time I'm going to wrap it up.
There's one more in the back, I think.
One more in the back? Okay. This will be our last question. Then after this one, if you want to come up front, we can answer some questions up there, but we'll dismiss everyone after this question.
And it's like,
And
what are
balance.
we doing to our kids? What are we doing to them? And I don't agree with what universities are doing to these kids at all.
Can I add one more thing? Like, remember your kids don't have to go to college to pole vault. I know a lot of kids reach out to me for that all the time. Like, I just want to keep pole vaulting. Like, when I was around, there was Earl Bell Athletics, and that was it. That was the only club. There are so many clubs all over the place now, where if you just want to pole vault, you don't have to go to college to do that if you don't want to go to college. So, just another thought is another way to keep the fun rolling as long as you can.
Guys, thank you. Just reminder that if you're going to the,
So, if you've made it this far, you're one of my favorite people on the entire planet, and I appreciate that. I hope there was something in here that was helpful, and again, if you want to support what I'm doing, team-hoot.com or head over to owlmh.com. All right. Guys, remember, there's more than one way to pole vault, and I will see you in the next one.
He went to a mental hospital, and I checked out for a few months after crying on the runway saying, I can't try anymore.